European Union leaders have confirmed that sufficient progress has been made to move Brexit talks onto the terms of transition and a future trade relationship between the EU and Britain. The EU's strategy imposed a series of deadlines that forced Theresa May to choose between the huge political and economic costs of no deal or acceding to the EU's demands has worked for it so far. May has agreed to pay up, secure citizens' rights, and negotiated a form of words on the Irish border vague enough to appease Dublin, Belfast, Westminster, and Brussels. The next deadline is March 2018, the first point at which the EU will be ready to talk about the future relationship. EU officials are calling for May to spell out in more detail what sort of relationship she wants before then. So May has 3 months to find a consensus among her cabinet colleagues on a desired Brexit end state. She will need to balance the demands of hardliners such as Liam Fox, Michael Gove, and Boris Johnson, with those of Philip Hammond and other moderates. But, given her Brexit red lines, the EU will offer a standstill transition for 2 or 3 years, in exchange for a non-binding political declaration sketching a trade deal far worse than single market membership. A standstill transition is all that is on offer, and it is the only way out of the EU that avoids the cliff edge. A standstill transition will let Britain stay in the single market, but the UK won't have any votes in the Council, a commissioner, or any members of the European Parliament. The UK will have to continue to respect freedom of movement, and continue to be subject to EU laws, including any new laws that are enacted during the transition period. More than 12,000 directives, regulations, European Court of Justice judgments, and other decisions were made by the EU's institutions in 2016. The vast majority are uncontroversial, but some will be difficult to accept. This raises questions about whether Brexiteers will accept the transition. Consider EU directives. These are EU laws that must be passed either by the government, using statutory instruments, or, in the case of more important laws, by Parliament. The Commission will propose new capital markets legislation in 2018, which will have an impact on the City of London, rules for taxing the profits of digital companies, and laws that make it easier for police forces to share electronic evidence. Some of these proposals will not be passed by the Council and European Parliament. Others will be ready for legislation once Britain has left the EU in 2019, but while it's still in the transition period, it takes 18 months on average for Commission proposals to become law. The passage of new EU directives may prompt revolts by Brexiteers against their own government, if the Conservatives remain in power until then. If Britain refuses to pass the legislation, a political crisis will ensue. The Commission might take the British government to the European Court of Justice.